Conexión de almas. ¿Por qué podemos sanar a otros? Una explicación científica y psicológica. Por Nataly Orellana.
Soul connection, why can we heal other? A scientific and psychological explanation. By Nataly Orellana.
Buenas tardes.
Today, I'd like to invite you all to be here with me during this session so that you can learn a little bit about the work I've been doing and so that you can learn about the lens that I've been using to work with parents that have decided to take on problems their children have been having through regression therapy. Today's talk is titled Soul Connection, Why We Can Heal Others. And in some way in this conversation, we're going to talk specifically about psychological explanations of how this affects interactions in other social areas, and we'll also look at some of the neuroscience behind this. I'm a psychologist. My name is Nataly Orellana Cuellar. As I said, I'm a psychologist. I work with past life therapies, batch flower remedies, and I'm a member of both the Spanish Association of Regression Therapy and the Chilean Association of Past Life Therapy. Today, to begin, I'd like to give a short introduction. I mentioned before, the work that I'm presenting today has to do with the work I've been doing for some time now. I understand that there are many professionals that work with children. However, from what I can see, what's different here is there are many parents that have wanted to and want to get to know the experience of their children to be able to understand better the interaction that they're having with what's going on for their children. And this is an incredibly important change in terms of what's happening in these relationships as well as in how this affects many other areas of life. To get started, it's important to mention that past life therapy is a form of transpersonal therapy where we focus on getting to know an individual not just as a physical, mental, psychological being, but also with its spiritual components. And we incorporate other elements that are more subtle in our relationships. So with this knowledge as our foundation, we can identify that everything that is happening around us as patients this can also be connected to our connection with another person. In this way, it's important to highlight that connecting with another person, in general terms, superficial terms, could seem really easy. Simply going to the other person, starting a conversation. But therapeutically, it's incredibly complex, given that we need to be able to, as parents, as caretakers, to be in the other person's place. It's not just empathy, but to truly be in their skin, living their experience. When I decided to give this talk, I did so mainly because I've learned through my own experience as a mother and as a past life therapist about the impact that this change has in us as adults and then for our children, and how positive that is. When we connect souls in an experience of past life therapy in this way, the work is a little bit different. Usually in PLT, past life therapy, our patient would be the one in front of us, lying down on a sofa, for example. But in this case, it's the parents or the caretakers of these children whether it's because those children aren't in a physical or mental state to be the ones there, the parents are the one who experience this therapy for their children. So it's this adult who's going to have the entire experience, everything from the relaxation, getting to know the root or origin, cause here, seeing any fragments or pieces, and then restructuring everything in this therapeutic session, so that afterwards the child can be more complete with these elements now incorporated, integrated for them. So when I talk about the connection between souls, I begin by identifying that regression therapy isn't just a wonderful personal therapeutic tool, but it's also a wonderful intergenerational therapeutic tool. It's a tool that allows us to connect from absolutely spiritual planes, and from that place, healing is different and deeper. This way of connecting allows us to understand how the work done through parents, with parents, can have a positive impact on each of our children. And of course, from this perspective, I should start by talking about the scientific and psychological bases that allowed me to understand why such profound change was achieved in these children. I'm not a neuroscientific psychologist, I'm a psychologist, but I do know about neuroplasticity, and I imagine that the majority of you all know that all of us have in our brains the possibility of changing connections, our ways of thinking, through experiences that we've had in the past or ones that we're having now. This foundation, this starting point, is what allows for effective change on a brain level in adults that are living these experiences. So when we have an experience in the present moment, our brain generates, it stores, observes and stores information so that we're able to have the ability to take on similar situations in a way that now results familiar or positive to us in the past. This happens during our entire life. We store information in different parts of our brain, and every time that an element looks or feels similar to something we've already experienced, there's a connection made. So it's important in this case to highlight that for the brain, this reaction that gets activated through similar elements that we've learned to experience and react to, it's interesting because the brain doesn't recognize whether the experience that stimulates this response is real or not. And from that perspective, it's not important whether the experience is real or not, and instead, the important focus is the ways in which this would allow us to incorporate the best tools for our neuroplasticity for achieving better results in the future. So when we have an experience in regression therapy, through past life therapy, through an adult for a child, our brain is also taking in all of the information and obtaining new responses, new behavior patterns to respond to the event that I am observing of my child in this past life experience. So you may be asking, how can all of this, what's happening in my brain, with this experience of a third person, how can this create change? How can this generate an effective, profound change in our children? Well, here's something very important and symbolic, which is Bowlby's attachment theory, where we learn that we are social beings that connect to each other through affective bonds, and we have these loving relationships, these specific bonds. And with these bonds and neuroplasticity, we create responses to people and situations based on how we first attached. Attachment theory shows us how when we're young, we begin to store all this information on care, affect, listening, and contention, and from that place, we recognize the other person when they're able to give us what we need. And that also allows us to give that information, that care, to others. So we're generating changes, neuroplastic changes, in the brains of the parents, activating responses around their primary attachments. And those parents, when they finish seeing the experiences of their children, they're able to replicate or repeat this bond with their own children and reestablish and restructure the bond and attachment with their child. Because getting to know the experience of the other person, not just from a place of empathy, but from what you've actually experienced yourself in your own skin, it teaches us to attach on a deeper level. Other important symbolic elements are EMDR, where we're able to desensitize and reprocess through eye movements. With this psychological technique, we see that we can work with traumas and see certain changes in the brain. I'd like to show you the next slide to show you what happens in our brain as parents with past life therapy and the therapeutic support offered after the experience, which is incredibly important in this work on a third person through the bond of souls. When we have parents, a father or a mother, that comes in as a patient to learn about the root cause of the problem that their child has, there are different parts of the brain that we see are affected and activated. There are many scientific studies that show that hypnosis specifically lights up all these different parts of the brain that we see in these images. These images were taken from a study from hypnoscience approach, from a study that was done a long time ago, where they found important differences in how the brain was activated during a clinical hypnosis that went into different elements that were both technical and therapeutic for healing. In this therapeutic exercise, in this research, 3 really interesting things were found. Firstly, they found that we recover emotional memories. This is where our hippocampus is activated. And the hippocampus is what allows the soul to show us an emotional memory. The soul is what's bringing these memories to us. And in this case, what it's bringing to our consciousness is the recovery of memories of our children. In this therapeutic work, as I mentioned before, it's the father or mother who acts as the patient, as the one who observes, as the one who does the therapeutic work. So in this case, the father or the mother, they ask for permission to their child's soul, and they're able to recover emotional memories of their children. It's the hippocampus of the mother or the father that gets activated, but at the same time, it's possible to activate in a much more expansive way what happens in the brain of their children. Once we've recovered this emotional memory and we've discovered its root cause, we should work with what emerges. We should identify important, meaningful moments, symbolic moments, in the same way that we would with patients who are lying down in front of us themselves. In this case, we also need to process on an emotional level this experience. And that's where the amygdala begins to be much more important. Once we've already experienced and observed what we've needed to experience, we'll be able to identify whether in these important and symbolic moments our child's soul has been fragmented by these traumatic, difficult elements that they've lived in the past. The amygdala is working on a high level to process what's happening to our child. From this perspective, we need to reconstruct many times everything that they lived, everything that we're seeing. When we have to see if there are fragments of this soul, if there were pieces that were broken for our children in these experiences, that's when we process more deeply all of the emotions that were trapped in our children in these past moments. But at the same time, when we connect with this pain and we process the pain of our child, the prefrontal cortex is also activated, which is what allows us as parents to help restructure cognitively these traumatic moments for our children. This is the moment where we're able to start recovering energy and soul that our children lost in this past moment. And that's where through reflection, through our adult view, containing everything that's happened, and taking in these elements from attachment theory, where we can help our children cognitively restructure this experience, whether it's from this life as a child or from a past life of our children. The aspect of this that is symbolic in the therapy is that the parent experiences these moments as if it were something that they themselves experienced, even though they know cognitively that this was an experience that their child has lived in the past. Then symbolically, also when we remember and look at these images of the brain that we have here, we see how past life therapy and the work done there activates areas of our brain, and we can identify that there are elements in other areas that have also produced changes, that have also allowed for changes that are profound, deep, symbolic, and important. To this point, we have to look at what happens after regression therapy. What happens when these parents have now seen the origin, the cause, the why, for why their kids are having problems in the present? They've seen how their souls were fragmented, how they were trapped in that moment. And they've come as loving parents to help recover and restructure cognitively what's happened in their children. This affects their quality of life and their social relationships because from that point of view, it allows the parents to connect in a much deeper way with their children. It's absolutely symbolic and impactful to see the ways in which they connect, because they don't just see their children from the outside. Instead, they've seen from the inside that they've had these very painful experiences. This also helps with the reduction of anxiety and stress for the parents, because after this experience, often they don't know how to resolve what's happening, how to reach their children with a meaningful, receptive answer and attitude that allows the children to feel bonded in a different way with their parents. So when we reduce the anxiety and the stress that we experience as adults, we allow the effective attachment, the bond that we are developing with our children, be amplified in all of the areas that the child finds him or herself. This, without a doubt, allows for the relationship between parents and their children to improve, because as I was saying before, when you have this experience as a kind of channel, we're able to see the other person from their own truth, their own depths. And so we get closer to them from a different perspective, in a different way. And doing so allows our children to bond with us from a completely different place. It opens up conversations. It allows the space that you have at home to be much kinder, and more integrative, more fluid. And all of this will create positive changes in our children's behavior and emotions, even without trying actively to do so. Often parents who go to therapy for their children don't tell their children about it, either because the children are very young or because they don't want to interfere in the changes for their children, and they want to visualize how those changes will happen for their children. And it's in those cases where we've gone deeper and we've realized that this therapeutic work is really beautiful, because it allows our children to create changes and for the parents to relate to them in a very different way, in a much closer and loving way. I'd like to tell you about some cases before going on to talk about how this channeling works from the soul to heal souls. In my experience, I've worked with some parents that have offered their problem, their reality, and they've given themselves to this work almost experimentally to try and see if this has a positive, if it makes a positive difference. I want to tell you about the experience of a mother who came to therapy for her 7-year-old son. And she came because she found that he was very angry, disruptive in his social relationships, and especially with her as the mother. She was separated. The son had a relationship that wasn't very close with his father. And the relationship that was being formed with the son seemed to be quite violent in terms of the language that was coming out. And this mother felt overwhelmed, didn't see any solutions to this conflict. So she came to therapy with this issue, and she mentioned that she would really like to work in a panoramic way with her son. And so what she proposed to me was that we create a wider kind of regression, to get a bird's eye view from above, to understand how she, in the present, with her own tools, can have a different quality of life and kind of relationship with her son. And so this is how, before she discovers, she enters into a very gentle trance where we ask her soul if it allows her to work on this experience as a channel to get answers as to what's happening with her son. Her soul responds, giving a yes, an affirmation, and then we ask for authorization from the soul of her son. When the soul of her son agrees to this work, that's when we arrive at the cause. And she recognizes her son in an earlier life, in a past life, in a country that she doesn't know or she's never been in this life. She sees him as an adult man, and he has a job, work that makes him very worried and overwhelmed. She begins to describe him as a man who's very worried. He has his brow furrowed, and she begins to realize that she's not there, at least not in these first images of her son's life. She's not present there. And so she begins to do the work here, to realize it's a life of a lot of pain, sacrifice, and injustice. And as the experience continues, she begins to realize that this son, this adult man in this circumstance, doesn't have a lot of warmth or positive feeling towards his father in this past life. And she begins to describe this father as abusive, violent, aggressive. And she describes him as somebody who has caused a lot of pain, a lot of suffering in this past life. She then arrives at a moment in which her son in the past life he encounters that father from his past life, and she realizes that that abusive father from the past life is her in this life. And that makes her son very angry in this past life experience as an adult. And from that place, she recognizes that a lot of the temperament that this man is developing in this life with his father is what she is seeing in the relationship that she and her son are having in the present. She's incredibly affected, moved by what she sees, and she feels a lot of compassion when she sees what her son experienced in this past life. And from that perspective, she continues deeper in the regression, looking for the most meaningful, important moment in this past life. And she sees this adult man who's still very afraid of his father, and she sees him dead at the hands of his father, who hit him and abused him to the point of killing his son. In this description that she is giving, she's realizing at the same time that as the son is dying, this adult man is dying, she's seeing a light that is coming out of the body, that is the soul of the body. And once this soul comes all the way out of the body, this son says he's going to come back because he needs to learn to have a relationship with his father. And this unresolved task made this woman realize that this son had come back to the present so that he and her could learn to relate from a different place, not from a place of violence or physical abuse, but that they have to learn to be together from a place of love. When the mother sees this, she sees that, of course, her son has lost large pieces, fragments of his soul, and has been trapped in this pain. And she decides, of course, to recover everything that the son lost in that experience. So she begins to work at recovering these trapped fragments for her son, so that in the present situation, in this life, all of the energy possible can be available to this relationship for them to have a different kind of relationship in this life. And she brings that energy back to the present for her son. When this therapeutic experience ends, the mother appears to be very affected, not just by the suffering that she's seen for her son, but also by how she herself, in this experience as the father of that man, had been so abusive with him. And she comes back 2 weeks later to continue with the therapeutic integration of this experience, with the analysis as the mother, after this experience of reconnecting from the soul. And she begins to describe to me almost instant changes that she saw in her son. She says, in the present moment, the relationship is completely different from how it was a few weeks ago. She doesn't tell her son about this experience because she thinks it would be very overwhelming for him at this age to learn about these events. But she notices that the relationship changes in a positive and significant way. And she says, after this experience, I began to look at my son not through the eyes of a naughty, sneaky boy, but instead as a man who was mistreated and who needs compassion. And I began to understand what the need is that he needs covered and that he is insisting that I cover. So through this bonding, this reattachment, the restructuring of the bond, symbolically, she's learned to listen to her son and see her son from a different place. As she asked me, seeing him from a bird's eye view from above, understanding things that had happened before, when before she wasn't able to understand why he was behaving the way he was now. And from this new kind of attachment and bond, her son begins to feel more seen, more heard, and his behavior begins to be a lot more controlled. His temper tantrums go way down. He's able to communicate and have quite deep conversations with his mother. They're able to have these deeper conversations where he's able to explain, as a 7-year-old, the main reasons that he is so angry, and they begin to establish a kind of contact where all of the reasons and causes that brought her to therapy have been reduced by almost 100%. She says, it's incredible what I've seen. Her bond with her child improves. The child's bond with his relationships with his friends improve because the anger was also appearing there. And that son begins to auto-regulate much better, self-regulate. And the son's relationship with his father also improves. This is only one of the cases that's allowed us to observe incredibly deep and meaningful changes in relationships and the impact in terms of how this is going to change the development of a relationship for the rest of the life of the child and parent. This mother who's had this experience in contact with her son's past life, she's never going to look at him the same way. And now she understands that his anger, it's not just temper tantrums, but that there's a reason from the past that she's experienced. Another case that I'd like to share with you all also involves a mother who decides to come to therapy because her son, in an opposite sense of what we see in the anterior case, the son is very demanding. And the son feels like the mother doesn't see him. He feels she's not able to be there for him. And so the second mother comes to us. And in this case, we do exactly the same process as before. It's the mother who enters into an expanded state of consciousness where she asks for permission from her own soul to do this work in the auric field of her son. And then she asks for permission of the son who also authorizes the work. And then we look for the origin of why this son is so demanding in the present and feels that he's not seen. In this case, the mother quickly arrives at an area that she calls open sea on a boat, and she begins to feel the sea air. We continue on looking for meaningful moments, and she begins to realize that in this life experience, that past life experience, her son, who is also a boy, is the son of parents who are fishermen. And his parents, who are quite cautious, don't let him go to the sea with the father, who's a fisherman. But this boy, in his curiosity, has always wanted to go with his father to work. And so when the parents aren't paying as much attention, the son is able to, at night, without his father seeing him, he enters into the boat without either of his parents seeing him. And so there, when his father is already fishing, the boy remains hidden to surprise the father. Once he's already at sea and can't simply return to the shore to leave the boy behind. In that moment, the father, who's deep in work, realizes that he should throw the net out to sea, and the boy, who didn't know how this worked, was hidden in the net. And when the father throws the net out to the sea, he doesn't realize that the son is trapped in the net, and the son falls into the ocean, the son of this mother who's come as a patient to this therapy. And the thought of the son, when he falls into the ocean, is that his father didn't see him, his father didn't realize he was there trapped in the net, and he needs to be seen. And desperately, he tries to shout out to his father, hoping that someone, specifically his father, sees him. And he demands the attention. He asks for the attention because he's dying, suffocating in this water. He's unable to do so, and this boy dies. He drowns because the father, who's focused on his work, doesn't realize that his son is drowning. And hours later, when the father decides to pull the net back up to see how his work is going, sadly, he realizes that his son is trapped in the net. It's a terrible moment. It's heart-wrenching. And the mother describes this moment as a moment of great pain, full of suffering and guilt for the father of this boy. And in some way, in that moment, the soul of the boy also got trapped in this thought that his father didn't see him. His father doesn't see him. His father isn't seeing him. This mother understood why her son, when he needed her attention, would always say this phrase, that she doesn't see him. And after this experience, the bond between her and her son begins to change because she looks at him differently, understanding that his need for being seen was connected to the need to be saved from that net. And she recovers all of the fragmented pieces of the soul of her son, allowing him to be more secure. And the son, in the present, learns to relate better to her, to others, and now as a child has also been able to learn to swim. And so in that way, we see how the reasons that people come into consult and the answers that come out, we're seeing that the impact this therapy has isn't just in the brains of the parent and child, but also in their social relationships and other aspects of their life. When we talk about channeling an energetic connection, we're talking about what we just described in these two cases. You see that parents are able to experience the memories of their children, and this allows them to benefit therapeutically from this connection. Because when we're able to connect in a different way, we're able to establish a better, healthier kind of contact with our children and reestablish a bond with them in a different way. What are some recommendations and ethical considerations for this job of soul connections? First of all, we do give importance to the requirement that the therapist who's guiding this is certified, empathetic, and of course has a sense of justice in this process. That they be qualified, of course, isn't just important when working with minors, but it's true that it's fundamentally important in these cases that the therapist be entirely ethical, not just with the parents, but also with the posterior integration and how that can be brought to the children. So as a summary, we can say that regression therapy through soul connection allows for an activated set of connections with the brain, with the hippocampus, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and therefore it can lead to improvements in emotional regulation, emotional memories, and of course, in traumatic experiences. We see changes in brain structure. Neuroplasticity allows new connections to be formed during the regression itself and also during the lifespan, because it promotes better emotional regulation as we learn better patterns of relating to others. We improve life quality and relationships, whether it's between parents and children or expanded to other contexts, because it improves social relationships, it reduces stress and anxiety, and of course this allows our lives as children, as parents, to become much healthier in that sense. And of course I also don't want to forget about other elements that are also relevant, such as comparative studies that have been done for therapy for trauma that support the conclusion that past life therapy helps with emotional integration. Neuroplasticity and the reconsolidation of memory also play incredibly important roles here for the work of emotional reconnection. So I would say, to conclude, that past life therapy can create long-term change. At least in my work as a therapist, I conduct past life therapy with parents through the soul connection, and I also give therapeutic support to the parent and sometimes to the child to integrate what they've found in the regression. So this work can complement the experience, the regression itself, to help improve cognitive restructuring and the bond that is being formed or reformed, the reattachment between parent and child. So these benefits translate into a deeper healing and a higher quality of life. And I do think it's important to highlight that this is a method that is absolutely holistic and effective. And without a need to go on much more, here I leave my contact information for those who have been left with questions, or there's something that you want to understand better, if you want to learn about new cases, more cases, or if you're interested in doing this work of soul connection, using yourself as a channel for your children or for a third person. I've focused these 50 minutes on the work of parents and children. However, this way of working past life therapies, we can also do it with other third persons, third people. So thank you very much. I say goodbye, and I wish you a good evening.